Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. David raced here from another engagement he had in the northern suburbs, so we appreciate the effort in getting here, and thank you all for your patience. David is Chicagoland's only professional full-time forager. He's been a wildlife educator and forager since his formative years. I don't know, how formative would that be?
8 or 9 years old.
8 or 9 years old, okay. He's provided foraged foods for over 24 Michelin-starred restaurants, worked with celebrity chefs. He's fed Martha Stewart. Was presentation important for Martha? Or?
I don't know. I wasn't there when she got fed.
Oh, when she got fed, okay.
I had 2 conflicting chefs buy stuff from me to feed her at the South Beach Food and Wine Festival when I was down in Florida.
Oh, okay. Well, so Dave has also been featured on the Discovery Channel, WTTW, Channel 11, NPR. I was talking to someone who heard you on the radio. Oh, yeah. The Washington Post and Chicago Magazine. He's been doing approachable, eat the neighborhood foraging tours for the public since 2010. So I give you David Odd.
All right, hello. Can everyone, I feel like this microphone's not on. Can everyone hear me?
The microphone is for TV,
okay.
For the room project.
Okay.
No, that's also for TV too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I used to be a stand-up comedian, so that's fine. So hello, everybody. How's it going? Has anyone here done any kind of foraging before? Show of hands. All right, cool. We got a few in here that know. But for those of you that don't, this is going to be kind of an eye-opening experience for you today. I always say that this is kind of like going to change your perspective on things as you go throughout your life. You're not going to be able to walk down the street, drive down the street without noticing these things. I always equate it to like when you get a new car and then you see that car everywhere for the rest of your life. It's like once you become aware of it, it stands out to you and you know what to look for. So there's obviously a few rules with foraging. Does anyone know what the first rule of foraging is, if you had to guess?
Don't know it, don't eat it.
Don't know it, don't eat it, right? Well, I have a little rule of my own that kind of negates that whole thing. And other foragers won't tell you about this, but I call it the 90% rule. And that is there are entire families of plants and even mushrooms that have no toxic members. So as long as you can narrow it down to being in one of those safe families, it's going to be perfectly safe to eat. It doesn't really matter if you know the exact species. Now, some examples of that would be anything in the mint family, anything in the allium or onion family, anything in the raspberry blackberry family, anything in the mustard family. These are generally safe plants for humans to consume. Recently, there was a story about a woman from Georgia who had some novice ideas of foraging and knowledge of foraging that was lost in the woods in California. She went mushroom hunting and got turned around, and she was out in the woods in the mountains for like 9 days. And the reason she was able to survive is because she was able to apply that rule to what she was finding. She might not have known the exact species of the things that she was eating, but she knew that they were in those safe families to eat. So when you do want to go foraging, always check your local rules and regulations as to where you're legally allowed to do so. Generally speaking, forest preserves are off limits. Nature centers don't want you picking anything. City parks and stuff have different rules about different things. A lot of them have no picking rules, but I think that mostly applies to like they don't want you pulling flowers out of the landscaping to make a bouquet for your mom or whatever. I think when it comes to like eating mulberries off of a tree or something like that, I don't think anyone's going to give you a hard time about it. If you find a mushroom growing in the lawn, probably nobody's going to give you a hard time about it. Kind of use common sense, check local rules. If you want to go foraging like for real, like mushroom hunting, for instance, state parks, state wildlife areas, anything under the jurisdiction of the Department of Natural Resources, generally speaking, is going to be fair game for mushrooms, berries, fruits, and nuts in Illinois and the surrounding states. Greens have like different rules in different places, but always just check your local rules and regulations, or just pretend you don't speak English. That works too. And then always kind of use common sense about where you're picking things at. Obviously, don't pick things right off the side of a busy highway because they're going to be polluted. Don't pick things where the old lead factory was. Don't pick things behind the dumpster of an oil change place. Don't pick things from Gary, Indiana. You get the idea. Yeah, just use common sense about where you're picking stuff at. People get very wary of like, oh, pesticides and herbicides, and how do you know that a dog didn't pee on it? And it's just like, compared to the things they intentionally put on our food from the grocery store, A little bit of dog pee is not going to kill you. Just give it a good rinse. You'll be okay. So just use common sense about where you're picking things at, and you'll be fine. Other than that, does anyone have any questions before I start going through these plants? So I had a tour in Des Plaines today, and then I had to rush over here. Originally, I had a tour in Highland Park. That one got canceled, and then I picked up another one in Des Plaines, and then I came over here. So I didn't really have a whole lot of time to pick stuff, but I got 20 things literally in the last 10 minutes. Just from outside here, on the way here. So I'm gonna show you a bunch of stuff, and we're gonna pass it around. This is gonna be a very hands-on demonstration today. But this, like I said, literally these are just plants, and even a mushroom that I found on the way here, right here in Riverside, just around the area. Now, how many people are going on the foraging walk after this? Okay, cool. We got a bunch coming. And then who are you, some of you coming to the meal later too? All right, cool. So we got a dinner at the Choo Choo later, which is going to involve a lot of these wild foods that you're seeing. So I'm just gonna reach into my bag here and start showing you stuff and passing it around. This is a very common plant right now, and if you smell it, it smells like summer. Like this is like the smell of the summer breeze. It's actually an invasive plant, but this is yellow sweet clover. And this is a very common roadside plant in disturbed areas and kind of like all little margins in between where there's weeds growing. And you'll notice that smell is very familiar because that is one of the smells that you smell after like they cut the sides of the road or whatever out in the country. Like this is what you catch on like this is literally the smell of the summer breeze. This is not native to the United States. It's actually native to Europe and came over here because it's invasive, like a lot of other things. But this is a really cool plant. So clovers are in that 90% rule. Anything in the clover family is going to be safe for human consumption. The thing is that clover leaves, generally speaking, are very hard to digest. So you don't want to eat clover leaves necessarily, unless you're like grinding them up, putting them into a smoothie or something like that. But clover flowers are actually quite nutritious and very easy to use. You can make tea out of them. You can just put them on things as a sprinkle. You can actually dry them out and grind them into a flour and use them as a flour, if that makes sense. But the flowers of clovers are actually very nutritious. They're related to legumes. So a clover flower has about 23% protein in it. So much so that when people are on like the Appalachian Trail or they're doing some long-term hiking or anything like that, they will actually collect clover flowers as they go because they're plentiful and easy to identify, dry them out, and put them into their MREs or their pancake batters to help boost the nutritional content. Now, this one in particular, sweet clover, before grocery stores existed, people that were not rich couldn't get things like vanilla and black pepper and chilies and things that were considered exotic ingredients from overseas. So they would have to make do with what they could find in the environment. And this plant in particular was actually used in place of vanilla. So people actually use this plant like vanilla flavoring. And once you dry it out, you can actually crunch it up and put it in directly into baked goods, or you can make a tincture out of it just like you would do with vanilla beans and use it like a vanilla-like flavoring. So that's fun. This is another plant that you'll find growing all over the place. And I'm gonna bust it up a little bit so you can smell it. This is called goldenrod. And a lot of people are familiar with goldenrod. It's a very common plant here in the Chicagoland area, particularly in the late summer and fall. It's got these showy whorls of like yellow, golden, orange flowers. It takes over any prairie restoration areas and weedy areas and fields. And it's very showy. So this is one of those things that you'll see in the late summer and fall. And a lot of people think they're allergic to it because they see these orange, yellow flowers and they're coughing and they're wheezing and they're sneezing and they blame it on those flowers. But goldenrod, the pollen is actually too heavy to actually cause problems for humans. Because it's spread mostly by insects, it is not a wind-borne pollen. So you're not allergic to goldenrod. And in fact, goldenrod tea is actually very good for people with allergies. What you are allergic to is the ragweed that grows right next to it and is very small and diminutive, has little tiny flowers that you can barely even see, and that's what people are actually getting allergic to. It's kind of like people say that they're allergic to the cottonwood fluff, but you're not allergic to the cottonwood fluff. That's just seeds. What you are allergic to is the willows that are blooming at the same time, and people just associate it with that. This is a fun one, and I think I have a couple of examples of it. This is actually called salsify, or oyster root. Yellow goat's beard is another name for it. It's kind of in the same family as dandelion, so it's got a similar look to it, but they get very tall and they have these very showy yellow flowers. And salsify is actually a kind of a fancy root vegetable that's used in high-end restaurants and stuff, and this is actually just a wild version of it that you can actually harvest and use the roots. It's also called oyster root because the root tastes similar to seafood, which I don't know if that doesn't sound very appetizing to me, but some people like it. This is two different versions of, it's one of the things of getting things in a parking lot. Some fluff in there.
Wash your produce.
Yeah, definitely wash your produce. This is actually two different forms of wild lettuces that we have here in Chicagoland. And wild lettuce is actually the parent species of all of our domestic lettuces were derived from these plants. These are also called opium lettuce. When you break the stems, they bleed a whitish or yellowish sap. And that sap is actually a sedative or painkiller that Native Americans used for centuries. And you can either make a tincture, you can make a tea, you can eat the leaves, or you can smoke it, and you can get those effects from it. Now, it isn't as strong as opium, but it does have a relaxing sedative effect, and people use it for things like toothaches and stuff like that. You can also eat the leaves, however, they are quite bitter. If you let your garden variety lettuces go to bolt, they'll actually produce a white sap as well, although I don't know if it has the same medicinal properties. This is a fun one that you can see all along the roads right now. And this is one that some of you may be familiar with. This is chicory, yes. So this is wild chicory. The very same chicory, in fact, that they make the chicory coffee out of down in Louisiana. It's very popular. But the roots of this plant are actually collected and roasted into a coffee-like drink. They're very cocoa adjacent in flavor, and you could use those same roots as a cocoa powder substitute as well. Now, chicory is also a green you might be familiar with that you can get at the grocery store that is also derived from this plant. So you can also eat the leaves and the flowers of the plant as well. However, they do tend to be quite bitter. The cool thing about this plant is the flowers are one of the few things that are truly blue that you can find in the plant world that are also edible. So that's kind of fun. Now, this one might be familiar to some of you. Does this plant look familiar to you? You've probably seen it in your alley. Like I was talking about with the sweet clover being a substitute for vanilla amongst poor people before vanilla extract or vanilla beans were easy to get. This is called poor man's pepper because people used to use these seed tops in place of pepper. Now, this is in the mustard family or the brassica family, and mustard is another one of these safe families, a 90% rule. Every type of mustard is edible to humans. Typically, mustards are going to have a bottle brush configuration of seeds at the top of the plant, like you see right here. If you've ever let your radishes or broccoli go to bolt or whatever, you know what I'm talking about. They start to get pods that grow in a bottle brush configuration. The reason that mustard-derived vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, kohlrabi, kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts are all called cruciferous vegetables is because the flower is a perfect cross. So there are 4 petals that are usually white or yellow, but they can be other colors as well. And that is why those are referred to as cruciferous vegetables. In fact, all of those vegetables I mentioned are all derived from wild mustard, the same species of wild mustard that has been coaxed out for different genetic traits, like their stems, like their leaves, like their flower buds for broccoli and cauliflower. So a good way to know if a mustard that you find, once you identify it as a mustard, mustards are pretty easy to identify. And if you find a mustard and you're not quite sure what kind of mustard it is, all you have to do is take a leaf of it and roll it up in between your fingers and smell it. And if it smells like something you would eat, it's going to be good. If your immediate reaction is like, ugh, don't eat that one. That's the rule. But you can go ahead and try the seeds of that if you'd like. I collected it from a very safe alley. All right, let's see what else we got here. This is another common alley weed that you'll find. This guy is actually called curly dock. It's in the Rumex family, which is yet another one of those safe families that you can find many different varieties of plants in that family growing. If you're familiar with the garden sorrel that is popular in Polish and Russian cuisine, it's a long leaf plant, perennial that grows in your garden. They make soups and stuff like that out of it, and the leaves are very tart and sour. This is a related plant. Curly dock is probably one of our most common Rumex family plants that you can find growing in neighborhoods and stuff, and you'll notice the leaves look like curly green bacon. The leaves of this plant, especially before the flowers and seeds arrive, are actually quite tasty. They have kind of a kale feel to them. They're kind of a little toothier, little firmer bite to them, and they actually taste pretty nice. They have a little bit of tartness, a little bit of bitterness, and they go good in a salad or just raw. You can also blanch them or cook them if they're a little bit older. And the leaves and the juice of the stems have a mucilaginous kind of goo to them that you can use in place of aloe, or basically like you would aloe. So they actually have skin healing properties. So if you have a bug bite or a cut or a bruise or something like that, you can actually use the juice of this plant to help. When I got my vaccine, the first vaccine I got, I was hearing about all these arm pain and soreness that people were getting. So I got some of this, and I got some plantain, which is another plant that I will show you, and squished it up and put a little ball of it right under my Band-Aid at the injection site, and no pain, no swelling, nothing. It was awesome. The seeds of this plant that you see on top that are forming, once those start to turn brown, you actually collect those seeds and you can roast them and turn them into basically what amounts to a rye flour. And you can essentially make pancakes and crackers and all that kind of stuff out of it. It's related to buckwheat, so it's actually quite nutritious as well. Do we have any questions right now as I'm going through all this? Yes?
You said you were a stand-up comedian.
I was.
How did you morph to this?
Well, I've always kind of been into nature and stuff, so this was just kind of a natural fit for me. Originally, I started selling to chefs wild produce that I was finding, and then I started teaching about it and doing these tours. And then I got really burned out on comedy, and then I got really burned out on dealing with chefs, and now I do this. So, and I'm much happier now. So, yes?
The leaves are all triangular for mustard?
Not necessarily. So mustard leaves are not the best indicator of if it's being a lot of vegetables that you grow in your garden are mustards. So it's they have those lobed kind of oak-shaped leaf, which is easy to recognize. But they're kind of all over the map. Like the poor man's pepper leaf doesn't look like a mustard leaf. Maybe at the very base of it. But generally speaking, mustards are going to have a basal rosette, which basically they grow from a central root where all the leaves kind of unfurl from there, kind of like a dandelion grows. And then when you see the stalks and stuff, they're going to start to get those crossed four-petaled white flowers or yellow flowers. Sometimes they're pink or purple, depending on the species. And then that bottle brush configuration of seeds on top. But the best way to know if you're definitely looking at a mustard is to smell the leaf. And the leaf will always clue you in as to whether it's a mustard or not. Now, this is actually an ornamental sumac. It's actually called, what is it called again? It's called not shining sumac. I forget what it's called. Oh, fragrant sumac.
Is there a sumac that's poison?
Poison sumac is poisonous, but all of the red Rus sumacs, which are like the ones you see growing on the side of the road with the big red cones on them that kind of look tropical, those are actually edible. And this one is called fragrant sumac, and it's actually an ornamental bush that you see in landscaping a lot. But those little brown things you see on there are the flowers that are going to become cones. They're going to be little red fuzzy berries. In the larger wild varieties like staghorn sumac and shining sumac that you'll find growing out in the woods and alongside roads and stuff, the cones will get quite large and they're covered in little hairs that are full of malic acid. Malic acid is the same acid that you would find in a green apple. So the cool thing with these is that when you kind of squeeze the berries and taste your fingers, it's going to taste like a Sour Patch Kid. That's how you know they're ready, is when they're nice and red and sticky. And then you can actually collect those and either make a lemonade out of them by soaking them in cold water and then straining and sweetening that liquid, and it tastes exactly, and I mean exactly, like pink lemonade. It's even got like raspberry notes to it. Or you can dry it out and turn it into kind of like a lemon-like dust or spice. If you ever go to a Middle Eastern restaurant, the sumac is one of the main ingredients in za'atar seasoning, and it's used in many other Mediterranean dishes. But it essentially presents as a white, like a reddish dust that they put over things to add a sour, lemony flavor. See what else I got in this mess. It's a random bag of nonsense that I pulled off the side of the road. This is called Live Forever, and this actually grows in the landscaping. It's actually a sedum. It's called Live Forever because once you plant it, it never dies. And this is a plant that you can find growing like in front of houses and along walkways and things like that. And you'll see it's got a very succulent leaf. And when these are young and tender, before the flowers show up, the leaves are actually edible, and they got this nice crunchy sort of lemony flavor to them. You can actually pickle them, you can fry them, and you can do all kinds of cool stuff with them. But once the flowers arrive, the plant gets really, really bitter, so you really only want to eat it in early spring. Let's talk about these guys. Oaks. We all know oak trees, yes? So by and large, oak trees are probably one of our most popular common trees here in the Chicagoland area. And oaks are like the champion of biodiversity, essentially. There are more insects and animals and plants that coincide with oaks than any other tree in the United States. So an oak forest is likely the most biodiverse place you can be in the United States. Just galls alone, galls, if you've ever seen a gall, it's like a weird little tumory thing that grows on a leaf, or like a ball that grows out of the stem. Those are created by insects, either a mite, a wasp, or a moth that lays its egg in the tissue of the leaf, and then the little larva hatches out and the plant starts to grow material around it to encapsulate it, and in doing that it's creating food and shelter for the little guy inside. Oaks alone have over 800 different varieties of galls that grow on them from different insects. And the Declaration of Independence was actually written in oak gall ink. So when you find oak galls, if you soak them in alcohol, they have so many tannins in them that they turn the alcohol black and becomes an ink. Now you wouldn't necessarily think of oaks as being an edible tree, but oaks, of course, produce acorns, and acorns were a staple diet of the Native Americans. So you can't just go ahead and munch on an acorn because it's full of tannins, which will make you sick, and it will dry out your mouth like nothing else. So you have to leach the tannins out of them to use them. Now the nice thing about acorns is that when you hack them in half, it's just one big hunk of meat in there. When it comes to things like black walnuts or hickory nuts or a lot of the other tree nuts that we have here, they have a fruit that grows on the outside. You kind of got to let that fall off on its own, and then you got to let the nut inside kind of cure for a couple of weeks before you crack into it, and then you need a special tool to get into the very hard shell to get the nut meat out in one piece. With acorns, chop them in half, and it's one big hunk of meat in there. Now, when you are harvesting acorns, what you would do is you would collect up all the ones you can get, you put them in a bucket and you float them in water. All the bad ones will float to the top. So if they got worms in them or if they're just bad, they'll float to the top and you can scoop all those off. All the ones that sank are the good ones. So then you would chop those open, take the nut meat out, and now you have to leach out the tannins. What Native Americans would do is you could boil them in a couple of changes of water to leach the tannins out, but then you're also cooking them and you kind of got to use them right away or freeze them or preserve them in some way, or because you're just kind of destroying them. In a survival situation, acorns are a really great survival food for winter because they have all those carbohydrates and the good fats and all the starches and the things that you would need for energy in the wintertime. What natives would do is they would take their acorns and they would put them in like a piece of cloth or like a basket, and they would set them in a river or a stream and pin a couple of rocks on top of them so they wouldn't go anywhere and let the water rush over them for a few days. And they would come back every once in a while and taste them. And if they didn't taste bitter anymore, they knew that the tannins were washed out. And then they could take those acorns and dry them out, stick them in a tent or in a snowbank or wrap them in a cloth or whatever, and use them whenever they needed them. Typically, they would pound them into a paste or into a powder and make like cakes and like muffins and that kind of thing out of them. Or they would just add them to like gruels and things like that. Nowadays, a lot of foragers don't have a clean running stream in their backyard. So they take their acorns and they put them in a mesh laundry sack and they set them in the back tank of their toilet. Not the toilet part of the toilet, but the clean water part of the toilet, because the water's constantly running in there and the tannins will turn the water like a murky brown tea color. So when you flush your toilet and it looks like tea coming out of your toilet, you know the tannins are still in there. When the water runs clear again, now you know the tannins are washed out. And then you can take your acorns and dry them out, give them another wash, rinse real good probably, and then you can store them for the wintertime, and you can just treat them like any other nut, put them in a jar or whatever. And essentially people treat them like a macadamia nut or a hazelnut or whatever. Most people will turn them into like a flour or a meal and make like muffins and cakes and cookies and things like that, breads out of them. If you go to an Asian market, you can usually find acorn starch if you want to like work with it to see if it's worth going through all of that trouble, but they do taste quite good. You could also make acorn oil, which is like, it's like $300 a gallon or something like that. It's crazy. But yeah. I got a lot of things.
Question about acorn butter.
Acorn butter, yeah, I believe you can do that too. You would have to probably roast them in some way or another. Now I'm trying to find all my leaves. Okay, there we go. This one's fun, and I recommend that you actually try a leaf of this. This is actually called horseweed. Now it's similar in appearance to the goldenrod, but you'll notice it has very hairy stems and a much more crowded leaf structure. Yeah, you can taste one of the upper leaves, like one of the ones on top, because they're probably gonna be more tender. This plant is really cool. When you chew on a leaf, first, it doesn't really taste like anything. It's got like a little bit of an herbaceous, maybe like a parsley sort of flavor. But after a while, you kind of get this like hot, peppery zippiness to it. So interesting thing about this plant is that when you cook it, like when you simmer it in water, it takes on the flavor of Dr. Pepper. And there are people that literally believe that this plant is one of the 23 secret ingredients in Dr. Pepper. So you can actually make a Dr. Pepper-like syrup out of it by simmering it in water. And then you can just use the leaves fresh and stuff as well to get that nice peppery bite. Are you getting the pepperiness? It's pretty good. Okay, this is one that I think that everyone should know about. This is called plantain or plantago. This is a plant you're probably all familiar with. This is called ribwort plantain. We do have other species of it around, but these are pretty classic examples of the plant. Now, if you look at the leaf, you'll see 5 very prominent veins in the leaf, and when you break the stem, those veins kind of pull right out of the leaf, almost like celery string. This one's not doing a very good example of it, but you get the idea. So this plant is edible. You can eat it. You can use the leaves like an okra-like thickener. The seeds can actually be eaten as well. The seeds are actually in Metamucil. The seeds also have a like a chia seed-like gelling property. So when you soak the dry seeds, they actually gel up just like basil or chia seeds do. So you can use them as like a substitute for eggs in vegan recipes. And you can just eat the leaves as is. But the best use of this plant is as medicine. So particularly if you have kids around, teach them about this plant, because if you get a bee sting or a bug bite or a mosquito bite or psoriasis or eczema or a sunburn or whatever ails you, what you're going to do is you're going to take that leaf and you're going to mush it up between your fingers. You could chew it. Native Americans would chew it into a paste, but you just basically squish it up in your fingers until it's wet and juicy, and then you would put that ball of stuff directly on the affected area. I get stung by wasps and bees a lot, and when I do, you're never like more than 50 feet away from this stuff. You go find yourself a plantain leaf, crush it up and put it on there, put a piece of tape or a Band-Aid or whatever over it, and I swear within 2 minutes, it's like nothing happened. It solves everything. It takes away the swelling, it takes away the venom, it takes away the pain. I was walking on a trail a couple years ago, mushroom hunting, and I heard some kids like crying, and there was a big fuss up on the trail ahead of me. And it was some grandparents that had their grandkids out for the day, and they ran into a nest of yellow jackets, and they got all stung. And I went and grabbed some of this plant and mashed it up, and within 2 minutes, they weren't crying anymore. It's like seriously better than anything over the counter that you can get. I swear by it. It's great stuff.
Any relation to plantain bananas at all?
No, not at all. This is why I call it plantago, because that's the scientific name of it. Because if you Google plantain, you're just going to get a bunch of pictures of bananas, and that's going to confuse you. Nobody really knows why it's called plantain. But this one is a fun one. This one grows kind of all over the place. It's another invasive plant. This one's actually called mugwort. Notice it has very silvery undersides of the leaf and a very distinct sage-like scent. And that is called mugwort. It is an artesima, which is related to wormwood, and it has a lot of the same properties as wormwood. So if you soak this stuff in vodka, you can make your own malort. And it actually tastes a lot better than actual malort. It's kind of medicinal, but it's like very smooth. And it has like kind of relaxant properties. It also gives you lucid dreaming if you make a tea out of it. It also is an abortifacient. So if you have any fetuses you don't want, you can just take a bunch of this. And you can use it as a sage-like seasoning in potatoes and things like that. And it also helps regulate lady problems, we'll say. It's got a lot of good uses, medicinally and flavor-wise. This one, I know I had at least 2 pieces of it, but I don't know where the other piece of it is. So we're just going to pass the one around. This is lamb's quarters. Lamb's quarters is also known as wild spinach. And you'll notice it has this very powdery dust in the upper bracts of the leaves where the fresh growth is. And you can actually like pull it off in your fingers and you can feel it. This plant is also called wild spinach. It is related to quinoa, the very same quinoa you would get in the grocery store, so you can actually use the seeds like quinoa, which is pretty cool. There's a baby ladybug crawling on these. That's fun. All right, buddy, I'm gonna put you back in the bag, or whatever. You can stay there. Do I have any questions right now? So you can use this just like you would spinach. And it's really common. You can find it growing just about anywhere. This is a fun one. This one you can find growing all in the landscaping throughout the neighborhood here. This is a ornamental onion. Allium is one of those 90% rule plants. Everything in the allium family is going to be safe for human consumption. Alliums are really easy to identify. If it looks like an onion and smells like an onion, it's an onion. You can eat it. And the nice thing about onions is that they make other things taste good. So, like a wildlife wilderness situation, survival situation, if you can find some onions, they kind of help make other things taste better. So if you only have a bunch of bitter greens to eat, sometimes onions can help you choke them down a little bit better. And any onion can be used for flavoring or whatnot, and these are no exception to that rule. All right. I do have dandelions in here too. I think we all know what dandelions look like, right? But the dandelion, of course, is edible. Everything on the dandelion is edible, from the root up to the flower. The leaves of the dandelion should only be eaten before the flowers arrive, because the leaves get bitter the older the plant is, kind of like we do. So you have to eat the leaves before the flowers arrive. The buds of the flowers are going to form before even the stalks do. So they will form directly right over the root, basically, right in the bract of all the leaves. And you can actually pull those off and cook them as their own vegetable, or you can turn them into capers, throw them into a stir fry. They're actually quite good. The flowers, on their fluffiest day, when it's nice and sunny out, you can collect the flowers. You can pull out the fluff and you can make like beignets and syrups and sodas and kombucha and wine and all kinds of things you can do with the flowers themselves. My favorite thing to do with them is batter and fry the flowers whole, usually in like some kind of tempura type batter. Fry them golden brown for about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. Serve them with a rich dipping sauce like a spicy mayonnaise or ranch dressing or something like that. Delightful. Very nice little snack, appetizer, and it's a fun thing to do with kids, to go out and pick flowers and then, hey, let's eat some flowers. So that's fun. Then the roots can actually be eaten as well. The roots can actually be roasted into a coffee-like substitute that tastes almost exactly like coffee. It's also diuretic, which is good for immunity and helps flush your system of toxins. It makes you pee a lot, basically, which is what diuretic means. So if you have to take a drug test, have some dandelion tea. You can actually roast those roots and grind them into a cocoa powder sort of situation as well, that you can make cakes and cookies and pastries and stuff with. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, there's the other lamb's quarters. Fantastic. This one, see if I can find enough pieces of it to pass around. This one is called black medic. If I can find it. I have 20 different things in this bag, by the way. I made sure to have 20 different things. Anyway, this plant is called black medic. It's actually in the clover family. And you can see this one here is starting to form seeds. So the plant isn't really edible on its own. Even though it is a clover, it's not toxic or anything. But the seeds of the plant, when they start to get black, you can actually collect a whole bunch of them, especially if you find a big patch. And because they're related to legumes, you can actually roast and grind those seeds into a really nutritious flour. They're about 25% protein, and you can kind of use them like a sesame seed or a poppy seed. Put them into seeded breads and on top of bagels and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of a fun one. And then let me make sure. I think I'm down to my last two. Do we have any questions right now? Another clover, which I'm sure you've all seen around, is the white clover. This is like your standard issue lawn clover, and just like all the other clovers, they are edible. The nice thing about a clover flower is the structure of it is if you break off the petals, they basically become like sprinkles. So you can actually use them as a garnish on all kinds of things. And because they kind of straddle that sweet and savory line, you can use them on a steak or a salad or on ice cream. And they make really lovely syrups and stuff. Put all this stuff in here. All right, I got two things left. Kind of got a grand finale for you. Do we have any questions before I get to those? Yes?
For the chicory root and the dandelion root, how much of that would you actually have to gather and then dry to actually get something usable for coffee?
I would say you probably want to get at least a pound or two of it, and if you find a good spot where there's a ton of it, like you can get pretty substantial amounts. And then some roots are going to be a lot bigger than others, but typically you want to get like enough to like cover with a couple of cups of water, essentially. So when it comes to like making a tea or making a syrup or something like that, you want to get enough of the product into a container that you can cover it with hot water, essentially, to brew it. You had a question?
Yeah, the white clover, can you eat the whole bud raw?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And that goes for any of the clovers. All right. You guys ready for this finale? Should we do a mushroom finale or a berry finale? You want the mushroom last? Okay. So the next thing I want to show you, and I was explicitly told not to have anything that's messy that can get on the carpets. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put some of this in a Ziploc bag so it doesn't fall. However, if you want to reach into the bag and grab one of the berries off and try them, I will not be upset. And then I'm going to put the rest of them in this box. I do have, by the way, if you want to learn more, I do have Sam Thayer's Field Guide to Edible Wild Plants of Eastern and Central North America here that I do sell after the tour if you are interested. There's over 700 plants in this book. It is the most comprehensive field guide ever made. And they're $33 cover price, but I sell them for $30, and they're signed copies. So if you want one of those, I do have them. I'm going to put the rest of these in this box. Please do not take the berries out of the box unless you're going to eat one. This is Juneberry, also known as serviceberry, also known as Saskatoon, probably one of my favorite forageable things. Now, Juneberries are native here in the United States, particularly in the eastern United States. However, you will barely ever see them growing in the wild. But they have become a favorite tree of landscapers and city planners because they have a nice compact growing habit. They have a pretty flower in the spring. They have a pretty fall color. And the berries feed the birds without creating a big mess like mulberries do. So this is a tree that you can find growing on the street. You can find them growing in front of apartment buildings. You can find them growing in courtyards. You can find them growing in parks. And this is something that has got a very short window. They're only ripe for about 2 or 3 weeks in June, usually, which is why they're called a Juneberry. And they essentially taste like a blueberry combined with like maybe a little apple and cranberry flavor in there. And then the seeds have like this amaretto-like almond flavor. So if you get a big handful of them in your mouth, it's like having a smoothie. And it's great. They also contain a lot of pectin, which is the starch that sets up a jelly or a jam. So they're a really good companion fruit for other things that are ripe at the same time, like mulberries, like black raspberries that don't have any pectin. So if you do a 50-50 blend of those, you can basically add your pectin without having to add extra stuff from the grocery store, which is pretty cool. Yeah, everyone's tasting them, so you know. There's nothing else that you're going to find this time of year that looks like that that's going to be toxic. The only thing you can possibly really confuse them with is like crab apples, which will be hard as a rock this time of year, and they're not going to kill you because crab apples are also edible. You'll notice that there's a crown on top of that fruit too, like if you think of a blueberry that has that little crown on top. If you see a 5-petaled crown, that is actually the calyx of the flower. So if you think of a rose, for instance, a rose has 5 petals typically, and there's a little bract underneath each of those petals that hold it up. When the fruit when the flower gets pollinated and those petals fall off, those little bracts will become the top of the fruit because the fruit develops underneath the flower. So if you see that 5-petaled crown on top of a fruit, that means it is in the rose family and is going to be safe to eat. Now, a lot of them do have toxic seeds, like apples and pears, and a lot of the stone fruits. All of those are in the rose family, including blueberries, including Juneberries, including strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, apples, pears, cherries, plums, peaches, all of those are in the rose family. It's a huge family of plants, and almost all of them have edible fruits. So that's cool. Did everyone try a Juneberry? I got this from a tree right around the corner, so you can probably go find it. Yes?
What do you forage that you make sure you have stock in your own home?
Almost always these. So every year I do what I call an every berry jam. So every time I find a berry, I'll turn it into a jam, and then I will add the last jam that I made when I'm done making that jam. And by the end of the season, I have like a 12 berry jam, and it's absolutely awesome. And I actually use it more for savory stuff. Like I'll make milkshakes and stuff like that with it. But taking a really sweet jam and mixing it 50-50 with like a whole grain mustard or something like that and putting that on burgers or hot dogs or sausages or something, game changer, amazing. And you use it to make gastriques and all kinds of other things. I think on the menu tonight, he's doing a mulberry gastrique on chicken or something like that. And then, yes?
It's kind of the same question, but what do you feel like at the produce section at the store is like the biggest waste of money because you could just pick it?
Well, fun fact about these June berries is that if you ever get blueberry pie filling in like a can or like just a crappy diner like blueberry pie, 90% of it is made with actual serviceberry. Yeah, crazy. And there's so many like greens and vegetables and stuff that you can get from the wild that you don't really have to buy. Like even like apples, like there's so many wild apples. So many people grow fruit trees. If you see a fruit tree in somebody's yard, ring their bell and be like, can I have some of your fruit? Because their answer will always be like, oh God, yes, please. Please take some. Because it's way too much for them to use and they get all over the ground and stuff. And so if you find a neighborhood where a lot of people have fruit trees, just ring bells and you can walk away with buckets and buckets of free fruit. It's crazy. All right, grand finale. You guys ready for this? I was rushing to get here and I had to stop and slam on my brakes and pick this. This is a pheasant back mushroom. It's obviously very old. This is more of a cool weather mushroom. So this is something you're going to find in the spring and in the fall. Doesn't really smell like, it smells a little bit like something. But this is a polypore mushroom. A polypore mushroom is a mushroom that has pores on the bottom instead of gills. They're what I like to call idiot-proof mushrooms. There are polypore mushrooms that we have here that you cannot confuse with anything. Chicken of the woods, hen of the woods are the two most common ones that you'll find, and these pheasant back mushrooms. These will smell like cucumber or like watermelon rind when you cut them when they're fresh. But a lot of these polypore mushrooms, as they age, they get really tough and leathery. So you can really only collect them when they're very young and tender, particularly with these. If your knife can't just easily pass through it like butter, or if it doesn't just break off when you touch it, don't eat it. Like any part where your knife stops, that's going to be too leathery to eat. Essentially, the underside should be really smooth and the pores should be closed. It's not going to hurt you if you eat it when it's too old. You can still make a stock or whatever out of it. But with these, it's like it's kind of like an okra or a green bean or a cucumber or whatever. You want to harvest it at the right stage. Like you don't want to eat an okra that's like tastes like wood, you know. So I'll pass this around so everyone can take a look at it. It's a pretty common mushroom and it's pretty easy to spot. You can not only find them in the woods, but you can find them just growing in neighborhoods and stuff. So don't be afraid to snag one off of a tree if you see it. Yeah, go ahead.
What size would be the right time to harvest it? You said that one's old.
Typically, you want to get them when they're smaller. But like I said, like either you can either just grab the mushroom and kind of yank down on it, and it'll snap off where it's tender. But you'll know when it's tender and young, like it'll be really pliable and it'll break really easily. If it's too old, you're not going to even be able to tear it. It's going to be like rubber. But these are really great mushrooms. They're out at the same time morel mushrooms are in the spring. And for my money, these are better than morels. Because morels, you got to wash them, clean them, and then if there's any little bit of grit in there, it just ruins the whole dish. These are like really nice. They're meaty. They're usually growing on on a tree or on wood above the ground, so you don't even have to clean them most of the time. But yes, you got a question.
Do they grow near any poisonous mushrooms?
I mean, they can, but typically they're going to be growing on their own. They typically like elm and ash trees, but they can grow on cottonwoods and other hardwoods as well. But they're pretty easy to pretty easy to find in certain areas in the fall time or in the spring. Yes?
Have you ever like made a mistake and ate something that wasn't edible?
Yes and no. I've never sent myself to the hospital, but I have like burned my mouth chewing on things I shouldn't be chewing on. When I was a kid, my routine was if I found a berry or something, I would like taste it to see if it tasted like anything. And I once found Jack in the Pulpit seeds on the forest floor, and they looked like a little red corn on the cob on the forest floor. I'm like, well, that looks interesting. And I bit into one, and it's got calcium oxalate crystals in it, which are like, if you look at them under a microscope, they're like little shards of glass. And so that got into my mouth, and it was like somebody injected hot sauce under my lip. And it stayed for like a couple of weeks. So I don't recommend doing that. And nowadays, like, we have books, we have apps, you have social media groups and stuff. There's really never an excuse to make a mistake. Take a few pictures, especially when it's mushrooms and stuff. You want to take good pictures of the habitat that it's in. You want to take a picture of the top, take a picture of the bottom, take a picture of the stem, take a picture of it cut in half. Post it on a group for that kind of thing, a mushroom identification or plant identification or whatever, and ask people, hey, what is this thing? Before you go harvesting it, before you go eating it, make sure the ID is clear. And never just trust somebody's ID either. Like, definitely check and double check to make sure that's what you have. And other than that, it's pretty easy to like not screw up, especially with the polypore mushrooms. Chicken of the woods, hen of the woods, like there's really nothing you can confuse them with.
So for the polypore mushroom, we had it's a maple tree out front.
Yeah.
Finally was there, and there was a burrow with an opening, and there was a big mushroom coming out of it. Somebody said that was more, they thought an elephant ear mushroom.
A what kind of mushroom?
Elephant.
Ear mushroom?
An elephant ear mushroom. It might have been this. I've never heard of.
Is that ever get mixed up, or does that sound like that's
That
where
probably
that
is
would be?
another name for those, an elephant, because they get really big. So I would imagine people call them that. But the oak trees and the oak forests are really good places to look for mushrooms in the fall time, especially because we have hen of the woods mushrooms, which grow right at the base of oak trees, and then we have chicken of the woods mushrooms, which are like bright orange and really hard to mistake for anything. And both of those are really good, very good for you as well. They got all the good polysaccharides and cancer fighting and all that good stuff. Yes?
Do you usually wash this mushroom at all when you eat it?
Unless it's got bugs or dirt on it, no. Usually just brush it off and cook it.
And then what's your standard washing process for like your average thing you showed us today?
It really depends on what it is, but usually just like holding it under the water and shaking it around a little bit is good enough. Salad spinner is always useful in that situation. I usually literally I'll fill the salad spinner with water and kind of mush everything around in there, and then dump out the water, keep it in the basket, dump out the water, and do that a couple of times to wash it, and then put it in the spinner and spin it dry, and we're all good. Any other questions? Yes?
You watch Naked and Afraid?
I'm aware of it, but I don't really watch it, no. Yes?
You have that, your reaction to it was I'm not impressed. What show do you watch that you're like, okay, I can see what, you could relate to what they're doing there?
Since I moved out to my cabin in the middle of the woods, I don't even have a TV set up. So I don't really watch a lot of TV. And I've been involved with several reality TV show productions. I actually did a pilot that I produced, and a couple other ones that I was involved with in one way or another. And I can honestly say that every single reality show is just absolute BS. It's all staged, it's all made up. None of it is real. I was on an episode of Moonshiners a couple years ago. They were doing an episode on Al Capone's bathtub gin, and they needed to go out and get juniper berries to make the gin. So that's where I came in. I took them out to get juniper berries. And I watched that episode. It was a 45-minute episode. I was bored as hell watching that episode, and I was in it. And then they obviously faked like they were making gin. Like it clearly wasn't, like they didn't test anything. They didn't test the alcohol. They just like, it was complete BS. So yeah, I don't know. Everything's real. Like whenever I'm in a hotel or whatever and I flip through the TV channels, I'm like, what is there any like, is there any actual shows on? Like everything reality TV? It's just people yelling at each other and stuff. It's depressing. Yes.
The guy from Into the Wild.
Yes. Christopher McCandless.
Did you feel that was like a really...
The general consensus among foragers and naturalists is that guy was an idiot. Because he went into that situation wholly unprepared. He didn't know, and he didn't even have a novice knowledge of like edible wild plants or anything. He brought like 1 or 2 books with him and didn't know what he was doing, which is not recommended. Yeah, he screwed up and starved himself to death, basically. Yeah.
He didn't poison himself?
The thing that he poisoned himself with is what starved himself to death, because the poison actually like basically makes your body reject the nutrients from food. So he ate something that basically shut down his body's ability to like digest food. Yeah.
Have you foraged all over the country?
I wouldn't say all over the country, but I've been to California and through the desert. I've been down to Florida. I used to go to Florida during the wintertime to get citrus and stuff and bring it back up here for chefs. So I did a lot of foraging and stuff down there. I foraged for like goji berries and like sea beans and like things like that on the coast of the ocean and at the furthest south point you can get in the United States and like all that kind of stuff. So I have foraged in a lot of different places, but I'm not as familiar with things out there as I am here. But like when I was out in the desert and stuff, I was finding mustards that I didn't recognize, didn't know anything about, but I knew that they were mustards and I was eating those and stuff. So
Probably just 1 or 2 more questions
Yeah.
because the library closes at 3 today. So.
yes.
You recommend an identification app. Is there anything that you
So I use Seek.
novices?
I use Seek by iNaturalist, SEEK by iNaturalist, and it is an app where you can literally point your live camera at things and it will identify them for you. Now, it's not 100% accurate. I wouldn't even say it's 80% accurate, but it has a little meter on there that'll show you how confident it is in the identification. So if you pointed at something, it might be like, oh, well, this is something in the apple family, but it won't give you a specific, but it'll usually get you in the right ballpark. But like I said, a lot of like the apps, especially for mushrooms, are like wholly unreliable. So never take that at its face value. When you get an idea or you get into the ballpark, then you want to do further research to identify what it is that you're looking at.
Okay, well, 1 more question.
What was the app you just mentioned?
Seek, SEEK by iNaturalist. And then I do, in fact, have these books for sale if anyone wants to get one. Yes.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I think.
Are you going to go over those when we go outside? Like,
If we find some, yeah.
not as safe as the poor
It depends. There's some that are safe, like chanterelle mushrooms are generally pretty easy to identify and safe. But when you're first starting out, it's best to just avoid gilled mushrooms altogether, unless it's something like an oyster mushroom or a chanterelle, which are really easy to identify. But other than that, when you get into the gilled mushrooms, that's where you run into like the toxic stuff that will shut down all your organs and kill you. All right, guys.